Okay, so the reason I thought I would do this webinar talking about emotions was that I know that for many people this is an issue that they are struggling with, or they want to understand more, and this is my journey over the last few years as well. In that, obviously, excuse me, 13 years ago, I just did the journaling. Did journaling and explained, so did the educational journaling. And then as the years have gone on and opened up and understood a lot more about this, and each of us bring to the table all our own understanding and skills we have as well, which is great. So the way we integrate it might well be slightly different for everybody. But I felt that it might be a good way to actually just show where I'm going with the emotional awareness side of things, which I'm finding really helpful with my patients. And then you can pick bits of it, or look further into sort of things like tracking, for example. And really, when I'm talking about emotional awareness, it is similar to somatic tracking. It's a similar thing, and it's really about developing building our interoception, our understanding of the sensations we experience in our body, in our body's embodied experience. So what are we noticing within our body about emotions? But I thought I would start with how, when I'm talking to clients, how do I start introducing things? I've got a few images I'm going to share. And obviously, when we're talking about emotional awareness, we not all encouraging patients to acknowledge and express emotions. It's not just all about somatic tracking or emotional awareness. And obviously, most of us are more aware of have a bigger understanding about journaling, for example. And so I'll always ask where people are at, what do they know so far? And this is when they're already on board with this, and we're really encouraging them to go a little bit deeper, okay? And so as far as the journaling is concerned, if they've journaled and they're saying that it just doesn't help them, I'll always ask how they journal. And for many people, the reason it's not working is that they are very good at journaling about what's going wrong and how bad or sad they're feeling. But many of them then every day will go over and over the same sort of things, and they're keeping within those emotions, rather than actually at the end of that then looking at, okay, what can I do to improve the situation now? What will help lift my mood? What do I feel grateful for, etc. So if somebody has done a lot of journaling about all the mad, sad things that might be going on for them, I will then encourage them to do rationalizing their thoughts. So they might have had a big journaling session and really express primarily how they're feeling, but if the same worries or fears come up every day, I will encourage them to note them down, feel how they're feeling, as in the rationalizing their thoughts, but put their focus mainly on rationalizing that, putting things into perspective. What can I learn from it? Because then they're training their brains to start looking for what's going well in their lives, rather than just focusing all the time on what's going wrong. Okay. One of the first things I encourage people to do is, while I'm assessing them, I will be noticing when they might be looking uncomfortable, or whether that's emotionally or physically, and I will pause them at that point and just ask them how they're feeling, and I might well then immediately encourage them to go into slow belly breathing, maybe emotional awareness. Generally, what I'll do in an assessment is these days I will teach them slow breathing. I will check what they're like with their slow breathing and teach them that first, explaining to them that TMS, PPD, is a protective response. So these symptoms are protecting us from what are perceived to be threatening emotions. But then, unfortunately, as these sensations come up, whether it's the sensations of a feeling or whether it's a pain or another TMS symptom, we then often will get scared of those, so we react to that. You know how if you are feeling angry, we can have powerful sensations in our bodies just through that feeling of anger. And especially if we've learned that anger's bad as a child, maybe our dad used to lose his temper and hit us, or we had a volatile parent, then we would learn that anger's bad, and therefore we would learn to sort of repress that. So even the sensation of frustration could actually mean deep anger, deep down, but all they're aware of consciously is frustration. But the sensation that they're experiencing could be very scary to them, because actually the feelings, what they're trying to do is repress the feeling of anger. And so whether it's the anger or whether it's the sensations of anger, those can feel a threat to us. And therefore, with our thoughts, and especially if we're anxious, we can actually then add the stress on top of the stress. Okay? So one of the first things I teach them is the heart-mouth breathing. So the slow breathing. I tend to not focus, if at all possible, on saying belly breathing, because they can get so confused between belly and breathing up here in the belly. And I remember as a physio, respiratory really having people struggling with learning to diaphragmatic breathe. So I generally use the heart-mouth explanation and get them to imagine that they're breathing in around their heart space, so the air is going in, circulating around the heart and out again. As they are breathing in, the belly's coming away from the backbone and it settles down as it goes back. And just they're nice and relaxed, and encouraging them not to be breathing up here. This is when it's good to have their video down so you can really see what's going on. You can observe their breathing in and out if you're not face to face, as most of we all aren't at the moment. But really seeing how, if people have been doing yoga for years, generally they're very good. I've got one lady at the moment who just can't get it. She's in a very anxious state anyway, and so her emotional awareness at the moment is not great because she can't actually relax because she's always in fight or flight, and therefore she can't even use the heart-mouth breathing to calm things down. In fact, I've recommended the heart-mouth feedback monitor to help her learn to breathe more rhythmically. The difficulty, unfortunately, is that price has gone up a lot as well, so I'm not sure she wants to £160 now, so she doesn't buy it. So we'll see how we go there. But if you think that the slow breathing, the heart-mouth breathing is allowing you to settle down into the relaxation space. And I'm going to go through the polyvagal chart in a minute to show how I explain that as well. So the first thing I do is the teaching of the heart-mouth breathing, and why that when we notice we're in the fight or flight or freeze response, it's about bringing them back down to the relaxation response, self-soothing, calming themselves down. I also started using the terms pause, breathe, and feel, so that whenever they're aware of a spike in their pain or a sensation that pops up somewhere, or they know they've had a button pressed, I encourage them to just pause, start the breathing, so slow they're breathing down and calm themselves down, and then to observe what's going on in the body. Now, at first I was using the term feel, pause, breathe, and feel, but that's more active, and it feels like, I was getting the feeling that people were in their heads trying to work out how to feel, whereas actually it's easier to explain how to observe the difference between observing and listening, which I'll go on to. So what I'll do is I'll go through the polyvagal chart first of all, and I show this to them, and I send it to them if they need to as well, because we often say you can't change anything until you're aware of it. We all go around saying, talking, causing stress to ourselves by the way we speak to ourselves. We can't do anything about it until we're aware of it. So awareness is really important. And also encouraging clients to recognize that just because they understand a concept, that is not necessarily the reason their pain will go. If they have an epiphany, if they have an aha moment, and it just sinks down into the unconscious and the fear dissolves, the beliefs change in that moment, yes, absolutely, then reading something can help. But so often people think that all they have to do is read and understand, but I understand this. I had somebody this week saying, but 99% sure that this is TMS, why hasn't my pain gone yet? And then obviously it's going into conditioning and explaining about that. But this helps them begin to do the pause, breathe, observe, helps them begin to become much more in tune with what's happening in their body. And not what's happening pain-wise, but actually just observing the normal shifts and things that we would feel day to day, and being able to just start to notice and not react to them. Okay, and again, we'll come back to that. So let me just share the screen. And where's it gone? Okay, the screen and then find the image. Okay, so I presume you can all see that. So as you know, I've only just started using this polyvagal chart because, like everybody else, when you start going into it, and the academic side of it, it's really off-putting. For me it is anyway. And I love this chart because and I tend to use the main section rather than this section along here, that some of that I will use where necessary for each individual person. The main thing I'm looking at is helping them recognize the importance of being aware when they're in social engagement, when they're in the ventral vagal part, okay, which is the relaxation response, the parasympathetic relaxation response. So with this, it's helping them recognize that when they've got pain, when they've got tension, and there's frustration and anger, they're in that fight or flight. So rage, anger, irritation, frustration, panic, fear, anxiety, worry, concern. These are all things that are an indication to them that they are in fight or flight. And then you can see as well that because it's the sympathetic nervous system, then they can have an increase in blood, their blood pressure can go up, the heart rate can go up. These are all signs of fight or flight and preparing them for action to be able to run away from a threat, but helping them recognize that this is a primal response, and this is something that primarily the primal part of our brain is set to look for threats, okay? And if we are, obviously in the physical animals and primal times, if we had a life threat, then yes, we'd need to be able to run away or fight, depending on the situation. But because as we all know, most of our stresses are psychological stresses, there generally isn't a life threat. That doesn't mean that our primal part of our brain is not going to react as if there is. So it's about helping them recognize when, develop an awareness of when they are in that fight or flight, when they've been triggered, when they're feeling angry or frustrated or irritated, or when they're feeling tense and feeling an increase in pain. Okay, the freeze response, this is the dorsal vagal. Okay, this is the dorsal part of the vagal nerve, and this is actually when there's a life threat. And this is the point where, if you think that, if we go through these stages with, let's say, a deer that's been chased by a lion, the deer is eating the grass, perfectly happy and settled, and then it notices the lion. So it goes into this fight or flight to try and flee, to try and run away from the lion. But if the lion captures it, then it unconsciously and automatically reacts going into this, because it's now a life threat, it can just switch off. Okay, the blood pressure will go down, the heart rate will go down, everything just is as if it's dead. And that's a protective response, as we know, because if the lion decides that it's not hungry or it's trying to keep another predator out of the way, then the deer, as soon as it's able to, will suddenly come around and be able to run away. As it's coming around, as we know from some of the trauma work with Peter Levine, as they come around, they have a tremor, they release some of this emotion for a tremor, and then they run away. So they are able to physically express the emotional build-up that they've had, and that will help them come back to there. So this is the perceived danger, the fight or flight perceived danger, and we want to fight or flee. But if things go on and on, or it gets to a life-threatening state, this is when people can go into freeze mode. And this is often where people are when they're, often when they present with APD, but also in this lockdown as well, that people are feeling hopeless and helpless, sometimes dissociating and depressed. So this freeze response is that where there's a perceived life threat. And it doesn't mean you jump from literally one to the, go from one to all the way up and then back down. You can go straight from social engagement to freeze. Okay, and there's many times patients of mine are saying that, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, and it feels like they're real in victim phase, and that's really the freeze response. They're feeling shut down, they're feeling hopeless. Does that make sense so far? So what I'm trying to encourage my patients to do is to be more aware. And because you know how we would tend to be working, and even these days, probably most of us at some point, we might notice a reaction, maybe from an email or something, and maybe at times we will just push through. But it's about having that awareness, and for even all of us to notice, okay, what's going on? If there's been a trigger, I'm feeling, pressure in my chest or whatever that sensation is, to then be able to pause, breathe, and observe what's happening. And that's then going into emotional awareness. Okay? So this I would explain as a way to help people start being more aware and to encourage them to use self-soothing, self-nurturing tools to bring them back down into this social engagement where they need connection. They're more compassionate, they're mindful and in the present. They're not thinking about fears or anxieties. Okay. Now I've just written a blog that I've just added to the website actually, and I'm going to share in a newsletter soon. And it's based on Bessel van der Kolk's factors that can lead to psychological trauma. And I just felt it might be helpful to include links to that, especially during this time, because this lack of connection we're having, this self-isolation or lockdown we're having, is creating all the factors. It can potentially trigger all those factors. And so it's about looking at those. And this is why for some, this social engagement, if we are physically not with other people, this is why it can be helpful to do, like we're doing on the Connect and Chat, to have time together, to be able to see people, get eye contact, see the facial expressions, because it's also important. And there are other factors involved as well, and that you can read the blog for those. But this is about really being aware of when do we feel safe? How can we encourage ourselves to feel safe? It might just be putting music on and sitting in a corner and reading a book, or it might be lying in a hot bath with some music and smells or whatever. But finding a way to feel safe and connected is really important, especially in these times. And then when you are triggered, which we all are, then it's noticing. And this is about developing this awareness, because in fact, last night when I was talking, did my Q&A with health professionals, and the majority were osteopaths, physio, chiropractor. And I shared the selective attention videos with them to show how, if our focus is on the physical, on what's actually happening in our life now, or the pain that we're experiencing, then we miss the fact that something's happened in our life that's triggered us. So this emotional awareness we're doing is not focusing on the pain. It's not obsessively focusing on the pain and what we can or can't do. It's actually focusing on our sensations within us, our embodied emotions, how, becoming more aware of those so that we can often preempt a symptom coming up. Okay, so I talk a little bit about this freeze response, just explain, often just mention, helpless and hopeless. When you're feeling low, helpless and hopeless, then you're in that freeze response. And you're trying to, and this is why so many people now are saying that they're so tired, that they're not motivated, and they're in that feeling helpless and hopeless. And it's about getting them more mobilized, more social connection, and then I use the feelings wheel, which we'll come on to, help them look at how they can then deal with that and start developing glimmers of peace and calmness and safety. So does that make sense for everybody? I don't go into any of the scientific side of it, because what's the point? For me, my work is very much about clinically supporting clients in being able to understand experientially what's going on, and to actually get out of their head and stop trying to work everything out, to scientifically work it out. Because actually this is about, then you're looking outwardly and trying to understand outwardly, and this is about experientially understanding it. So I'm going to stop the share on that one for now, and I'm going to unmute everybody in case there are any questions people want to ask up to this point. I'm going to all shout at once.
Is procrastination would go in the freeze bit as well? Because it's not quite not doing something, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean by that, yes. So you are faffing about and not getting on with what you want to be, but then I'm not sure, is that freeze, is that the freeze response, or is that also the fight or flight, because it's fear-based? I think it's actually verging on the freeze probably, but I'm not an expert in the polyvagal theory. But as well, does it really matter? Because actually, what we want to know is if we are procrastinating, there's an emotional cause for that, and therefore acknowledge how we're feeling, self-soothe, work on the fears, and then move forward. So actually, in practical terms, I'm not sure that it matters, but there probably is a good explanation for it.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else?
Sorry for coming late, by the way.
That's all right, John. Nice to see you. Our token
Hi,
man.
everyone.
I have a question about the terminology. I don't really understand why it's called dorsal or ventral.
Vagal.
Yeah,
Okay.
vagal.
So there is, what did we share? There's a video. Where have we shared it? About the polyvagal theory. It's the call. You can find it on YouTube. It has been added to the training, and I think we shared it in the members group at some point. And it's by a lady called
Deb
sorry,
Deb Darno.
Deb Dunn. That's it. And it's called the Pied Piper of polyvagal theory. Now, the nice thing about Deb Dunno is that she actually puts it in clinical terms. How can we use the polyvagal theory? And it's basically showing how it's not just parasympathetic is relaxation and the sympathetic is fight, flight, or freeze. That it's actually the vagal nerve actually splits into the dorsal and the ventral vagal nerve. And that they then, so the vagal nerve, although we have always thought it's all about relaxation, no, it can also, the dorsal vagal can create this freeze response. Okay, but if you watch that, I think we've tried it in the training to provide different videos of polyvagal theory, and they've all been complex until we had that webinar with Kay Reynolds, who suggested the Pied Piper of polyvagal theory. And I think for practitioners, that is a really nice, simple way to understand how we can utilize it ourselves and how we can use it with our clients as well. Okay. So really, I just use that chart because it's a nice, simple chart, and every single person I've shared it with has really liked it because it really helps them see the difference and to be able to start noticing for themselves when they think they're in one or the other. Okay. I then go on and use the feelings wheel. Let me just bring that up. It seems we can't actually find all of them at the same time. So let me just. They are. Okay, so this, can you read it all? It's quite small.
Go.
Let me just sit, not rotate. I don't think I can, oh, can I? Yeah. Oh, there we go, I can increase it.
Oh, that's better, yeah.
Okay, so we redid this because we didn't have permission to use the other one. I emailed, they didn't get back to me. So, and I really find this helpful with my own patients, and I was sharing it one-to-one with them, but thought if we're going to share it more widely, we can't, we need to prepare our own. So Zoe had a wonderful time putting this together, because it was quite fiddly. But then I've written a PDF to go with it as well. So I share that with my patients after we've gone through it, and so that they can then look at that. So if you look at the feelings on the left of the vertical line, these are feelings when our needs are not being met. So it's like angry, disgusted, afraid, surprised, sad, and ashamed. Okay. So at some point, I don't do this necessarily, well, I don't do this on the first time I see them, but at some point when I'm encouraging them to, I love your horse to go like this.
I'll try to read.
You can all have this. In fact, I'm sure we put it, have we yet put it in the members page? Members thing we might not yet have. Let me just write that down to make sure we do.
Will the polyvagal chart be in the files as well?
Yes, yes. That's, I'll check, but I'm sure we did put that in. So, oh, wait a minute, Lizzie's back. So with this, the reason I use this chart is to just, when we started doing emotional awareness with them, then I would bring this in at some point to start helping them begin to look at all the different emotions there are. I know there are many people who say, you know, pause, ask yourself how you're feeling, and then try and work out what you feel. Well, you're supposed to say, yes, I'm feeling sad or anxious or whatever. But my findings are that that keeps people in their heads because they're too busy trying to work out how they're feeling. So I tend not to use that. And I tend to just encourage them just to notice and to what's going on in their bodies and to actually observe and feel, rather than try to work it out. But this can be almost like a memory jogger. So something that they can look at, because, and then often when I'm doing this, I've already got a good idea where somebody might sit most. Okay, so I'll usually say, just have a look at these, and really it's about showing that, for example, if somebody, you know, it's not just about being angry, that anger splits into frustrated, annoyed, envious and mad. Frustrated splits into aggravated and upset, and annoyed into resentful and irritated, etc. So they all split down into smaller things. And I remember working with a guy recently who was telling me about when his dad used to literally physically be punching and kicking him, and he'd be in the corner of a room, and he had a clear memory of when he was 10 being in the corner of a room like this with his dad kicking him. He then was talking about something with his daughter, and he just felt, from what she'd done, I would have imagined he would have been saying he felt really, really angry, but he wasn't. And I just said, so how did you feel about this? And said, oh, just feel a bit frustrated. And that seemed odd to me, but of course not when you start considering that actually having a dad like that, you would grow up believing that anger is really dangerous, and therefore probably grow up to be non-confrontational and not even to be aware of how he felt of anger, because it's being repressed, because the reaction as soon as he starts feeling anger is it goes into shutdown, hence getting headaches, back pain or whatever. Okay, so for him, I wasn't using this with him, but if he'd look, oh no, I did, yeah, I did. So when we looked at that, he could see that actually frustrated was an element of anger, and that's all he was able to acknowledge and experience. So for him to actually sit with a feeling of frustration, then that actually was something that would help him then begin to start allowing other emotions to surface. So with the emotions on the left, generally I'll say, if you look along those and just see which ones you feel you most experience. Or I might just say, you know, one day when you're just feeling a particular emotion, look at it and just say, you know, how am I feeling? And it might be that they're feeling sad. And then just to look at it and just see, okay, well, what sort of sad are you feeling? Is it because you're feeling hopeless? Is it heartbroken? You know, or is it just sort of, you know, you're feeling grief? And for them to be able to look at that might sometimes in itself can trigger a reaction within them. Generally, for the feelings on the left, I would be encouraging them to journal, and even just asking a question on a piece of paper, when have I felt grief before? Or how am I feeling at the moment? It doesn't really matter, but it's about looking at this to help this be like an emotion jogger. Okay, and if there's somebody that maybe is angry a lot, looking at that and then thinking, okay, so let's journal about that, and when have I felt angry in the past, and how did I experience anger as a child? And they can explore it in any way that they want to, but having this wheel can just help them look at, become more, gain more of an understanding of some of the emotions that might be worth working through. And it could be lying in the bath and just saying, you know, noticing that they're feeling scared and just lying in the bath, maybe self-soothing through, you know, the stroking of the arms and just saying, I'm scared, I'm scared, scared, scared. And that's like, you know, they use it havening, transpirational havening, where it's like a tree with roots, and it will absorb the moisture from the soil. It will go through the roots, the trunk, branches, twigs, leaves, and out into the environment. And it's transpiring, the water is transpiring through the tree. And this is what they say, like if you're doing transpirational havening, you're saying something like scared, scared, or, you know, but sometimes I'll use this uncomfortable feeling. What's this uncomfortable feeling? You just do that. My mind, or just an emotion will appear and I don't know what it's about. But it can be good for this if you're saying, you know, if they don't want to journal, but they're just exploring, because what happens is that emotions come and go. And I had a response from a lady who in a TED talk talked about emotions that last 90 seconds. And I emailed her last year to say, where's the evidence? You know, have you got a study have you seen this in the study? And she's just literally replied yesterday, obviously got more time on her hands now, and she said she found it in the book A Stroke of Insight. I can't remember the lady who had the stroke. She was a neurologist, and oops, wait a minute. Somebody's bashing around. You're supposed to all be muted at the moment. I'm just going to mute a few of you. Should have all been muted anyway, but for some reason some are unmuted. Anyway, let's see how we go. Oh, probably, yeah, I forgot to do automatic mute all before when we stopped. Okay, so wait a minute. Chat. Oh, thank you. Yes, thanks, Lizzie. Jill Bolt Taylor. So she had a stroke, and she apparently, it wasn't a study, it was her awareness when she was recovering, was that emotions just come and go. And that's my experience. And I think we all know you can't feel joy constantly. We can't feel anger constantly. It comes and goes. Okay. Yeah, my stroke of insight. So this is really about allowing them to use emotional awareness, or doing this stroking and actually just mindfully observing a tree or anything and just saying to them scared or angry. And what happens is actually an emotion comes up and then just goes. And it's like with anything, it's really interesting to do because it will bring up anger from any time in your life and you don't actually know what it's involved, it's to do with, what it's linked to. But you can go for sort of 10, 15, 20 minutes and then different waves of this emotion will surface and pass through. So I find that quite helpful. But really the left side of the wheel is the main emphasis, is actually helping people recognize that even if they're not aware of anger, they might be feeling annoyed. And that's an element of anger. And maybe they can start exploring that. So the left side is about using the skills, the strategies that they have, whether it's journaling or emotional awareness, to really experience those emotions, to even the repressed emotions to start surfacing and allow them to be processed. The feelings on the right are the ones when our feelings are being met. And this is, if you mix this with polyvagal theory, they talk about triggers and glimmers. So the ones on the left can be triggers for symptoms. And that's why we want to make sure that we are acknowledging and expressing those emotions. What we're doing is trying to develop glimmers of the emotions on the right. So looking at, and often if somebody's been, let's say, angry, and that's what they've been journaling about, or that's where they tend to sit a lot of the time, looking on the opposite side of the wheel in the same colour, red, is peaceful. And that can be split into content, relaxed, tranquil, harmonious, satisfied, comfortable, etc. And what I encourage them to do is to look at the opposite colour and to start looking at what things in their life can they do that would provide glimmers of contentment, tranquility, calmness. Because then what they're doing is that they're nurturing that side. So they're acknowledging and expressing the emotions we tend to try and avoid, and they're trying to boost the emotions on the other side. And what I'll often say is just have a look at that side of the wheel and maybe write down a list of things that they could do that lifts their spirits, that makes them feel more positive or safe or whatever it is. And, this might be just putting on some music. But when we're feeling angry, the last thing we feel like is being quiet or calm. But there might be certain music, for example, that can help us just boost that a little bit once they've actually acknowledged and expressed the anger. And so it's finding a way of just lifting. And when you're in the middle of going through a challenging day, it can be difficult, can't it? You might be in the freeze response and be feeling completely helpless and hopeless, and you've done some journaling, tried to express it and put it into perspective. It still could do with maybe a lift to help you self-nurture, self-soothe. And that's when having this can help, because you could look at it and think, okay, I don't know, glad, pleased, what could you do in your life to make you feel glad or pleased? What could you do to actually feel calm or peaceful? Write down a few things. It might be going and sitting in the garden. It might be listening to birds, listening to music, having a hot bath, all sorts of things. But can you see the way I try and use this to encourage people to be able to build on those? And I like the polyvagal, glimmers. What can they do to actually develop a glimmer? So let me unmute you all and just ask if there are any questions in relation to that. All clear as mud. What was that, Lizzie?
I mean, there's a. I'm just trying to think what I was going to say because I popped in and popped out. Actually, the better that people have, the better. I don't know if you've seen this, but the better language that people have to explain their feelings, and the greater the complexity, the easier it is for them to shift their neurological state and deal with what's actually happening. And the poorer language that people have, the more they tend to get stuck in it. I mean, I often find with patients when I say, well, what's it like? Because I like that question because it gives you the kind of process of what's happening as opposed to what the diagnosis is. Because a lot of people have gone to the internet and kind of put themselves in a box. And quite often they'll say, well, I don't know, I can't really put it into words, can't really explain it. And that kind of keeps people stuck.
Yeah, it can.
Because the language can stick people, but it can also unstick people. It's a paradox.
Yeah. So this is where I find the feelings wheel helpful because they can look at it and be able to see. Whereas before, before I was using the feelings wheel, what I was finding was that because people felt they needed to be able to explain, it stopped them being emotionally aware. It stopped them actually being able to just observe what's happening in their body because they were too busy in their head trying to work out, okay, what's going on? How do I feel? I don't know. Am I feeling sad? Am I feeling whatever? And they say that if you ask people, they probably only really know 3 different emotions that they feel. So yeah, absolutely, it helps them with having a better understanding and awareness of their emotions and how to explain them, which can then definitely help. So yeah, so that's why I use the feelings wheel. So what was that? The other thing I was just thinking of. Are there any other questions before we move on?
Yes, don't you think that as our human condition that we naturally try and self-soothe, that we have to be in very dire straits before that's completely squashed? And then does that sometimes lead to the self-soothing becoming an addiction, for example, overeating?
Yeah, absolutely. That's quite possible because they're trying to find something to numb themselves. And definitely drinks, food, whatever. Yeah. So, but then that's not dealing with emotions. So self-soothing is about acknowledging the emotions, experiencing, acknowledging and expressing them, and then self-soothing. And I notice it myself. If I'm sometimes just thinking, God, do you know what? I just feel like some chocolate, or I want some cake, or whatever. If I pause and ask myself how I'm feeling, and don't look for an answer, but just do the emotional awareness, I'm very aware that there's, emotional stuff going on. And that then is an indicator, well, I've got a choice, haven't I? I can either just go and have a cake, or I can actually work on myself. And I'm not perfect, so occasionally I just go for the cake. But at some point I need to work on those emotions. So yeah, but you're right then, Maeve. Yes, we all try and self-soothe, and that's the problem because we're desperately trying to avoid having to deal with these emotions.
Oh, it's an avoidance then. Okay.
Yeah, because if you're numbing yourself, you don't need to deal with them, do you?
No.
Okay, so it helps you distract yourself from. You can either just be a workaholic, busy. You don't need to actually deal with them, or you could just actually self-soothe with drink or drugs or whatever it is, or food, and that means that you're soothing yourself, but you're not. It's avoiding you having to actually do. And that I always did that. For me, it never has been drink, it never has been drugs, but yeah, food, definitely. From boarding school days. From boarding school days, that's when that all began, because I had no family, I had no, I couldn't, I was torn away and I was not happy. So food definitely was something that I used to self-soothe. And some of you will know this because I mentioned it on the Mind Body Wellness and probably in the Connect and Chat. But a week into this lockdown, on a Friday, I think it was about 4 o'clock, my mood just plummeted. And I had no idea why. I'd been working away and then just suddenly realised I was feeling really, really low. So I decided to be kind to myself. And I thought, right, okay, I'm just going to finish early. And I journaled. And I just felt the need to journal at that point. And I acknowledged how I felt. I rationalised where I could, looked at, okay, what can I do to improve the situation at the moment? So I joined the Gareth Malone online choir that day. And then I went and played my keyboard, which I hadn't played for over a year. And I felt much better, and I was fine. I had no clue, and I tell patients this because this is important, that I wasn't looking for, I had to try so hard, I'm trying to look for that one thing that caused all this. I was not aware of what had actually caused this plummeting in mood, but I was able to acknowledge it, deal with it, lift myself up and carry on. But what was interesting was that within an hour of doing that, I was going upstairs and suddenly in my head popped the word boarding school. And it was like an aha moment. And I just realized, oh my God, yes, this is a similar scenario. I can't escape. I can't see my family. And it triggered the old neural pathways from the past of being in boarding school. Okay, so, but the important thing for my patients is for them to see that two things. One, I dealt with it without knowing the actual cause, so I didn't have to go searching for it. So my brain went then, so I didn't know what the cause was, but also that when our buttons are triggered now, it triggers old neural pathways that are linked in some way. Okay, so maybe the emotion was a similar thing, and again, if you can have your own experiences in this, and I've had a lot of feedback on the Mind Body Wellness series of people who are finding it really helpful. I think it's probably quite a bit of a wreck because I keep telling them all scenarios of mine, but it's helpful for them to then experientially think, when does it happen to them? So you can come up with things that you know you've experienced that you can share with passion and understanding. They then connect well with you. And another one of these that I talk about sometimes is many years ago, there was a new tax law brought in that we had to, if we sold online products, we had to charge the tax percentage of, add on the tax of each EEC country. So bearing in mind there's like 28 countries, all with different tax, it was like, oh my God, how on earth am I going to be able to do that? And because we use our CRM system, Infusionsoft, somebody I'd been on their course to teach us about Infusionsoft in the first place, she ran a webinar. So she started this webinar off and she was going to teach us how to automate it on Infusionsoft. So she started off by saying, I know this is scary, but I'll talk you through this. In the first quarter of an hour, she must have said, I know this is scary, in that tone, for probably 20 times. And so what happened?
Everyone
thought it was scary.
I became scared. It triggered anxiety in me. And I just started thinking, and interestingly, I emailed her probably a couple of weeks after that, and I just sort of mentioned and said, by the way, when you're running something like this, it's probably a good idea not to say that it's scary because you're telling people it is. I never heard back from her, but hopefully she took it on board. But I stopped. I turned it off. I paused it and I stopped. And I just felt, this was about 5 or 6 years ago. And I remember I just paused and allowed myself to notice how I was feeling. And it was triggering old neural pathways of anxiety, which started when I was 6, young, Air Force family moving around in and out of schools. And I had a different manifestations of anxiety at that point. But it triggered this. And so I observed how I was feeling and just sort of said to myself, so how am I feeling? And realized, okay, I'm just feeling anxious. Why am I feeling anxious? And again, I just didn't look for an answer. I just sat there and it was, okay, I'm scared of the consequences if I get it wrong. Okay. And then I said to myself, when have I felt like this before? And then just sat there. And then suddenly my childhood popped into my mind. I became a goody-goody. I became conscientious and perfectionist because I was scared when my dad didn't even lose his temper, raised his voice. He just used to say, oh, Georgie. And apparently I would burst into tears. I was about 30 now. I was about 8 at the time. But, he had 4 kids. He used to lose his temper. He wasn't an angry person and, he was a lovely person. But the fact was I was very shy. The others would argue back, but I didn't. And I became good because if I did good things and was nice and whatever, then actually it would reduce the risk of the consequences if I was naughty when I shouted out, sent to my room, or even have a smack. Bearing in mind, I last had a smack when I was 8, one of my sisters when she shows the difference. Okay, but it is, what is interesting there was that it triggered, again, the same feeling I had. And it helped me in that moment to recognize, okay, so it's not just this that's scary. It's seeming a lot bigger than it is. because of my childhood experiences. So I sat with it, allowed myself to feel how I was feeling, and then just said, okay, so what can I do about this to improve the situation? And I decided that I would watch the webinar at another time, the rest of it another time, and I would email my accountant and just say, you know, hi Nick, this is happening, can you explain it? Which he did. And that was it. But by the time and that took maybe 5 minutes, and the anxiety just settled down. And so that again can help people recognize that when a button's being pressed now, it's not just now we're dealing with, it's other stuff that it's triggering. And so therefore, if we use emotional awareness for how we're feeling now, we are also starting to deactivate the emotional charges from what it's linked to as well. Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions with that?
No, but just a little ringing true, Georgie. It's interesting because this morning I got a letter, a little thank you letter from my grandchildren, and they'd written, it was the writing that they'd written on it. And I welled up emotionally and just started to cry. And I thought, this is extraordinary. Why? I was in the garden reading a lovely letter. And exactly, I've just been sitting with that as you described, and it was I think it goes back to boarding school and the letter, the writing of my mum or my dad or whoever, and I was separated and I couldn't get to them, which is my situation right now. So not that we have to even understand why we feel emotional, but you know, it's just to confirm those triggers.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So it's just making the connections and allowing yourself to sit with them without trying to find it. So the first one I talked about with the boarding school, I didn't understand the cause. That just popped into my head because I wasn't fine, because I cleared all the emotional stuff going on and then just got on with my day, and then just suddenly it popped into my head. But if I'd sat there trying to work it out, I would not have worked it out. I know I wouldn't have done. And yet on this other occasion, I just had that, it just linked, and I was able to just have that connection. Okay, so this is why I encourage this is why I encourage emotional awareness so much, and to be able to start really noticing it. It's more about helping them develop their awareness as to remember to do it, as well as actually going through the an emotional awareness process. I talked to them about helping them realize that this is not about looking for an emotion. This is not about looking for something. This is an inert way of doing it. So if they're looking, I usually use the term, if you're looking for a fish in a fish tank, you're sitting there and you're looking for it, and then you go, oh, there it is, and then you look around again. Whereas actually observing is about, you know, get your armchair, relax, which I have a friend who does this actually. He's got his fish tank and he just has his armchair and he just relaxes and he just observes. And when he sees one, it's there. Then he just carries on, and then he might see another one. And this is where the emotional awareness is, in that it's about surrendering, letting go of trying to find an answer, and literally just being able to observe what's happening in your body. So I encourage them to almost have a little awareness in the back of their mind, so that as they're going through the day, when they notice a trigger, and I certainly, if I'm working at the computer, I can be aware of a sudden change in my body. If I read an email, for example, maybe that's triggers me, or anything, I might be watching television and then something might trigger me. And so it's about, in that moment, being aware. And even if you can't stop and take a break, you can pause and just slow breathe, and then just observe, allow what's happening. And the idea is to not, if you're in your head thinking about the emotion or what's happening or how am I feeling, you're actually not allowing that emotion to just transition through the body. And yet when we do, I mean, it's quite amazing when you see that with clients, especially. You know, I remember doing this with a guy in London years ago, and he had an autistic son, who was, daughter actually, this one, autistic daughter, who was very challenging. And I asked him to, I was doing the heart math with him. That's what I was doing initially, teaching him the heart math breathing. And then I asked him to just bring to awareness somebody he loves, because this is about developing compassion, and you can't feel angry and feel love at the same time. So I encouraged him to think of somebody he loved and allow, or imagine them there, and really allow themselves to feel the love and compassion they feel for that person. And so he sat, and this is what they do with the heart math. And I encourage, this is a way of bringing them back into that green, the relaxation response. That's another way of calming the fight or flight response down. And he did it beautifully, and I could see him partly smiling as he was saying, yes, I feel a warmth in my chest. And then suddenly his whole demeanor changed. And you could see the tension coming in his face, and he opened his eyes, and I just said, no, close your eyes, carry on, just observe what's happening in your body. You don't have to explain, just sit with it. Don't react to it, just surrender to whatever's happening. And literally within a minute or so, you could see him sort of getting tense and then relaxing. And what had happened was that he was thinking about his wife, and then his daughter popped into his mind based on how she'd impacted their relationship because of how challenging things were with her autism. Okay, but he just said, oh my God, that's amazing. He said, I've never been able to do that before. Normally he would then go into his head and get sort of angry and wound up, and he would react to it. Okay, or he'd just go along, just ignore it and just try and ignore it and carry on. Whereas he learned in that moment to sit with it. Same thing happens if somebody, I had a patient recently, very anxious lady who's doing incredibly well. And the first time she came to me, couldn't sit very long. She had a 4-hour train journey. She didn't sit. She kept having to walk up and down the carriage, etc. And she came into the clinic and she just struggled to sit for very long. And so the first 2-hour assessment, we didn't go through her forms at all. We were working on breathing, on emotional awareness, and encouraging her to come out of the head, observe what's happening in the body. And this is where heart math is really good, because if you're focusing on the air going out around your heart, in and out, you can't be thinking, can you? Okay, so she couldn't be thinking about the pain when she's observing her heart. And if I could, sort of going, oh, then I'd be saying, okay, so just bring attention back to your heart, gradually, slowly breathing down. Took her through that, and then she could see the pain just going down. And then I might, in that phase, when I'm doing the breathing, I'll then say, right, bring to mind somebody you love. Allow yourself to feel how that makes you feel. Actually, that itself encourages any residual pain to just settle down. If they're doing it with that outcome dependence, with that, well, I've done that and it didn't work, then that's fear-based, isn't it? Because they're trying hard to do something to get rid of the pain, and that's the wrong way. This is about encouraging them to do things to improve their health and well-being, to help boost their relaxation response without any expectation, because we're trying to encourage them to actually expect, okay, whether the pain's there or not, whether it's there or not, it doesn't really matter. Okay, and getting to that acceptance of the pain, because that's when they can remove their focus. And there was another time she came in and she was sitting on the in my office, and we started talking about something, and then you could see her tightening up, and then she said, do you mind if I get up? And I remember saying to her, yes, I do actually. And she knew I was joking, but I said, just see if you can sit down. What you're doing is reacting to the pain, because she knows if she stands up, walks around, she can usually get the pain to settle down. What I wanted her to see was that it wasn't the sitting that caused the pain. And the more so I got her sitting there, taking her attention out of her head and the fears and worries about it, taking it into her body, doing the slow belly breathing, the heart math breathing, where her attention is on her heart, and imagine the air going in and out of the heart and surrendering, letting go, and the pain just really settling down. That for her has been crucial in helping her move forward. And being able to then, by doing the slow breathing and then being able to just acknowledge what's happening in the body, noticing what's happening. This is where with the emotional awareness, somatic tracking, it's about allowing, and we've done this before in webinars, and we're doing it at the beginning of every Mind Body Wellness one as well, is actually just encouraging people to close their eyes. You can do it with their eyes open, but if you do it with eyes closed, you're internalizing, you're getting rid of all the distractions from outside, and then encouraging them to observe their body and just to notice, and to notice that things are always changing. So even if they observe, even they're resting their attention on the pain, it's really about gently resting their attention, observing without trying to change it. And the aim of this is the more you can allow yourself to just observe what's happening in the body without reaction, you're reinforcing to yourself, your inner child, that you're not scared, that it's not threatening, that you are able to deal with this. And for many people, I find explaining about the inner child is helpful here, because they begin to really see that this is their vulnerable inner child that's scared, and that the pains come on because that vulnerable part of them is going, oh, I'm scared. Then actually, by doing this emotional awareness, they're sitting there and allowing themselves, they're showing their inner child, it's okay, we're safe, it's all right. And therefore, they're not reacting to it. So gradually over time, by not reacting, you're reassuring and reassuring, and gradually then that neural pathway can start. That makes sense? And talking about neural pathways, I often use this image. I often use that image because I found it a really helpful way to say to people, you know, when they've been triggered, okay, you've been triggered, you just sort of whoop, straight down the neural pathway of pain. Whereas actually, you can then just pause, breathe, feel, and then reassure yourself, and then start making your way through another path. And then another story I tell is about being on the trampoline with my husband before I got blown away in the gales. And I would never go on the trampoline because I would have a bad neck and back. Or I'd go gently on my own, never with anybody else. And on this occasion, my husband double bounced me by mistake, because my husband did it deliberately. And that's why I didn't usually go on with him, because he's 6'1", considerably heavier than I am. And so therefore, he double bounced me and I went flying into the air. The unconscious automatic reaction was for, I remember at the top of the bounce just thinking, oh God, I'm going to land, my knee's going to give way, my head's going to, I'm going to get whiplash. That was just an automatic, immediate thing because it had happened before. And that's what happened. And my knees gave way, I fell to the side, my head went, I heard it crack, and I felt immediate pain. But I then got off the trampoline. And I started to, first of all, again, I listened. So I'm here, I'd gone boom, straight down the old neural pathway. And I tell people this to show that you can then bring yourself back down, pause, breathe, observe how you're feeling. So I observed how I was feeling, allowed the fear, to allow myself to acknowledge the fear. And then I started talking really kindly to myself and reassuring myself and just saying, but Georgie, you bounced higher than that before without your knees giving way. Your knees gave way because you told them that they would. Okay, and yes, you heard a crack and pain, but you can't possibly have caused yourself whiplash, because when your knees gave way, you then only crumpled to the side and you hit your head on the trampoline. No way could it have caused tissue damage. You're fine. Everything's fine. Why don't you just start to move your head gently? And the more I did that, the more I started able to go back into a bit more of a pathway, but going back into a healthier neural pathway. And within 10 minutes, that was gone. I just want to show you one other thing, because while I'm here, two other things while we're here. If anybody's got time, but it's being recorded. This is one of Lorimer Moseley's charts. Have you all seen this? Yeah. Okay. And I use this to explain to people as well. Using an example, like if you're going to stretch your hamstrings, then usually you'll get pain before you have any tissue damage, because the body's protecting you from actually causing yourself damage. Okay, so we can't force ourselves to cause damage. What always concerns me is when you see young gymnasts and the teacher's getting another child to stretch, to push their back forward when they're doing hamstring stretching. That I hate. It's the same with if you're putting your hand towards a hot stove, that you will get pain before you cause yourself damage, because it's a protective response. But if you've got back pain, or like for me, I had, the fear that I had a neck problem, then you're going to have pain well before there's any tissue damage, because this is protecting you from doing anything more. So let's say you've got back pain when you're bending. Normally you can bend a long way and not have any back pain. Well, let's say there's a hamstring, you believe you've got a hamstring injury, or you've had a hamstring pain in the past, then you'll have a bigger buffer, because you won't be able to stretch as far and you'll get pain sooner, won't you? Because again, your body's protecting you, but it's hyper vigilant, and it's being even more cautious to prevent you from tissue damage. So that's just one I had there in case I used it. I thought I might as well go through it, because that is something that I show to people when they're being hyper vigilant, and that you're more likely to have pain because you are so focused on the pain and so worried about the pain, so therefore it's more easily triggered. But the other thing I want to share is this picture. And some of you know that I support a young refugee, just turned 27 yesterday actually, from Africa. And he's an artist, he's never been trained, but he does some amazing art. And in fact, Lizzie, you were one who came to the TED Talk last year, and he'd drawn a picture, in fact I've got it here, of a refugee child, and he won the art prize on that day. And this is something he was doing when he was first in lockdown and had nothing to do. And it was he just was saying, you can see from everybody on Facebook, they're freaking out, they're so scared. And so this was a way of him using his art to be able to express emotions. And I just thought, this again could be helpful for people to realize it's not just about journaling. One of my patients, by the way, he did this using a pen on a white pillowcase, because he'd left all his art materials in Huddersfield when he moved to Manchester. So I then bought some and posted them to him. So he actually had some proper stuff to draw on, because he is so talented. So somebody else who told me recently that when she'd done one of the free calls with me, I suggested that if she couldn't journal, pretend to talk on the phone, or the chair technique, imagine this other person that you, rather than unsent letter, you're shouting or talking to this person in the chair, and then you might sit in his chair and then decide, and then allow that person to respond, and therefore you're then hearing it from the other perspective. And you can even have 3-chair technique, and you have a third chair where that's the moderator. This lady said that she used a telephone, as she pretended to phone this person, and she said it was absolutely amazing. She said, I felt like I'd actually spoken to that person. It was so cathartic, but then you have to be careful you don't speak to the other person about it, in case that you say something you probably shouldn't say. But again, like journaling, it can be another way of really being able to express how you feel. Okay, so I will unmute everybody. And has that been helpful?
Yep. Yes, thank you.
Good. Any questions? More questions? So we're all learning with this anyway, aren't we? And if you haven't listened to John Strack's and Howard Huebner's webinar, that's worth a listen to as well.
Who was that?
John Strack's and Howard Huebner did a webinar together. I posted it in the TMS BBD group.
I saw that, yeah.
And I'll probably put it in the newsletter today as well. Yeah, it's interesting. They're lovely. And never forget, actually, I'm going to start. Has anybody got any questions before I say anything more?
I think I'll say something. I think this kind of going into your head is a bit of an addiction. It is an analysis. And again, it's a form of, we were talking about self-soothing. It is a kind of, I've lost the video, so I can't see anybody. I'm just speaking to a screen. But yeah, it's kind of like it is a way of having certainty, I think. And people don't like uncertainty. They don't like, so they can construct this kind of story and then get very sort of wound up with it. And they, as you said, they're completely paralyzing their nervous system. They're not allowing it to function properly and move as it should, because actually it's emotional all the time. But we do have this habit of going into the head and kind of like analyzing, and it creates a kind of a stuckness, and so
stuckness and creates even more stress, doesn't it?
Yeah, because how you think about it, the story you create, then impacts on your nervous system, and before you know it, you've got this loop going on, haven't you? Where
absolutely.
And nothing, and it's worse. The more intellectual people are, the worse it is.
It is. Psychologists and psychotherapists who are very much into understanding the emotional side and linking it to everything in the past, and also, yes, very intellectual people, because they're trying to intellectualize it all and understand it.
I think that's where I've been going wrong, because I'm just trying to work it out and put things together when really they don't go together, do they? They just are.
Absolutely, yes, yeah, absolutely.
Don't see patterns and stuff that isn't necessarily a pattern. I mean, look at all the stuff about COVID that people are coming up with, you know, that things that'll get rid of it and things that'll make it better. we hate uncertainty, and we would just love to create stories about everything. And it's a real human trait. And my colleague calls it anal analysis, as in anal.
Yeah.
That's a bit rude. Yeah. But yeah, it's a sort of, I mean, believe me, this is what I do. This is my habit, and I absolutely love doing it.
I don't think you're alone, Lizzie.
And actually,
It's my way as well. It's a dissociative way, isn't it? It's a way of associating from what you're feeling. It's a way of distraction.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Very effective. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording this. Oh, sorry, John. Go on then.
I was just going to share something in that I noticed that I was the only man here, and it's not surprising, maybe, that it's obviously more difficult. And this is a patient I'm working with now. How difficult it can be to have the conversation, to get into that with feelings. I find it so much easier with women than I do with men. So particularly this one now is our conversations could or have start off quite macho. Oh no, I don't. Well, dealing with all kinds of stuff in my time and all of that, which comes from him. Trying to set an understanding about, I've had a really difficult problem, which he has not yet addressed, but I have a really difficult problem, and I've gutted it out, and I've got the pain to prove it, and this kind of story. So I've come across that before, and I find that and this, he would be, if he was working with a woman, I'm sure it'd be the same, but worse with a man. What I'm very aware of, more than perhaps ever before, is how much I have to open myself up to, I'm very vulnerable, and I've been vulnerable also, and willing to share that he's not talking to an expert. He's not talking to somebody who's not had experiences that have been the same, or similar. So that it just makes him okay to start. It's okay to talk about your feelings. It's okay to get deeper into your feelings. That's okay. But I'm just so aware that it's important. I show my vulnerability and my non-expertise, so that enables him to be able to more easily go there.
I think that's a good point, actually, John. Absolutely. And it's not about being an expert, because everybody's different anyway. Their experiences are different. And we might be therapists that can help support people, but it's about showing them that we understand, we've experienced it, or similar things, rather than feeling that, we know it all.
Yeah.
But yes, I think it's true. It's harder with many men. I probably see about 50-50, but then again, by the time they come to me, they're ready, and they're ready to open up more. Whereas as a, put it this way, if I had my husband as a client, or if any of you had him, that's it depends on the type of man. That doesn't sound good, does it? But you know what I mean. There are going to be some. He's fully on board with this, and occasionally has journaled successfully and effectively, but actually I wouldn't go there with the inner child stuff or this emotional awareness. He's more willing to open up and show his vulnerability. But I think there are these alpha males, for example, where it is going to be more challenging.
Yeah. What I mean about the expert part is this guy, not every man's the same as this, of course, but in this guy's case, he'd love for us to get into a philosophical discussion.
Yeah.
He'd love for us.
That's great. That's great avoidance, isn't it?
Wonderful avoidance.
Yeah.
He'd love us to be in the conversation about neurology.
Yeah.
Well, he knows a great deal about it. He knows a bit, and that would be now we're putting on our, the macho-ness would be we're leveling off now. You know, I can talk about my my pain in neurological terms and so on. You know, so I switch off from that in as best I can. I'm just so conscious of it, so that's why I thought I'd share it.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's so great. Thank you.